Welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of castingacross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. Go to the Anto, sluggard, observe her ways and be wise, which, having no chief, officer, or ruler, prepares for food in the summer and gathers for provision in the harvest. How long will you lie down, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. Your poverty will come in like a vagabond, and your want like an armed man. That is a section of Proverbs that may be the most scathing rebuke for the lazy person that immediately came to mind. That was, politically correct and PG-13. We're talking about laziness today, specifically lazy fly fishing habits. And as I was driving back from skiing today, thinking about this podcast episode, I immediately knew that this was going to be part one of at least 2 or 3 parts of a series of lazy fly fishing habits. Things that you shouldn't do because you don't have to do them. You only do them because you're being lazy. And when I say you, I mean us. I mean me. These are things that I catch myself doing when I know better. And a lot of times, really, that's what laziness is. It's not, you're not lazy if you don't do something you can't do. You're lazy when you don't do something you can do, something you should do, something that would make life so much better. So we'll dive right into it. Here's the first one that I know that I've gotten a lot better at, and so this is me starting off at a high note, not super convicting. Don't be lazy and just tie a fly on to your leader. What do I mean by that? One of the things that is so important when you present your fly, which of course the presentation of a fly has many parts to it. It has to do with where you're standing. It has to do where you think that fish is going to be. It has to do with anticipating where you need to put your fly so that it gets to a proper point for that fish to eat it. So if it's a dry fly, it's going to drift over that fish. If it's a nymph, it's going to sink down. If it's a streamer, you can strip it across that fish's face or whatever it may be. But there's one thing that you can control, and not doing it is just lazy, and that is your leader, okay? Your leader is a vital variable within the greater presentation of the fly. A lot of times we think that as long as I can get that hook eye onto that tippet, that fluorocarbon, that monofilament, I'm okay. That's enough. Well, that's not true. If you go back into my archives and you read any decent fly fishing book that, talks at length about leaders and tippet and formulas utilizing those things, it's very, very clear that the presentation of your fly can either be helped or hindered, and hindered significantly by your leader. So I still utilize knotless tapered leaders for a lot of my trout fishing. For saltwater and for bass, I like to tie my own because I just think it's very, very simple to do that, and I buy big spools of fluorocarbon for those things. But for trout fishing, and I've talked about this quite a while ago, and I think even more recently than that, I will take a knotless tapered leader, and I will trim it down because I love the butt section of a knotless tapered leader to be the foundation for the leader formulas that I employ. And so, you buy a 9-foot 5X knotless tapered leader. It's this, extruded monofilament that goes from super, super thick butt section, I don't know, 20 pounds or whatever it is, with a well-tied knot, sometimes not super well-tied. I'll retie it. But then I'll clip that down, and I'll use like 6 or 7 feet of that, and then I'll do whatever I want to do at the end of it. You can, under most circumstances, fish with that 9-foot 5X knotless tapered leader and make a pretty decent presentation. But if you're fishing, say, a size 18 blue wing olive, you can probably get that 5X. You should be able to get that 5X through the eye of that hook, assuming your fly tire is nice and didn't get head cement in there. But the question is the water still? And if the water's still, it is moving maybe even at a very, very gentle flow, is that 9-foot leader going to be adequate? Or if there is a difference between the flow rate where your line is going to be and where your leader is going to be. Is 9 feet going to be sufficient? And so just taking some time, pulling, another 4 or 5 feet of 5X out of that little tippet spool and tying that on there, it can make a huge difference. Now, of course, castability is going to be impacted. There's going to be some other variables that are taken into account. But generally speaking, just simply tying a fly on, tying another fly on, losing a fly, snipping it off, losing 4 inches from tying that knot, 6 inches from a tangle, a foot from a wind knot, and just tying a fly on until it becomes impossible is lazy. Now, I think that, if you're new, then maybe that's new information, so it's not a lazy thing. But if you're not new, you should be paying attention to that leader and having that transition and that taper from your fly line into the butt section of your leader down into the terminal end where there's tippet that is going to allow that fly to drift or swim naturally, then that matters so, so much. So simply, throwing a streamer on that 9-foot 5X leader that you've been fishing dry flies with might not be the best choice. You might need to go to something more stout. You might need that 9 feet, but you don't need that 5X. So you snip that, back 3 or 4 feet and then run some of that 3X. So now you're maintaining that taper, but it levels out and it allows your streamer to have a much better anchor to it. Or again, as I said before, yeah, you can fit that tippet through the hook eye, but is that going to give that fly the best presentation? Just because you can fit it through there doesn't mean it's fishable. I think that's one of the things that is, it's just a simple thing. And when you're in a hurry, you maybe see a rising fish, just tying it on there to get it on there it works, and you'll catch fish that way. But to really get that fly to present well, then don't be lazy. Tie on the right tippet. So you can go as deep down this rabbit hole as you would like. The world of leader formulas, I think, is a really, really good one to be at least somewhat acquainted with. I don't treat it as dogma, but as you can tell here, I do think it's important, and especially for some presentations, as it relates to dry flies, as it relates to midges. Then having those leaders spelled out perfectly can really, really yield a lot of benefits. The nymph guys know this because they have to have, certain places where multiple flies are tied off, weights are tied in, things like that. That doesn't mean that that's not still important for fishing small dry flies or fishing nymphs in a more traditional sense, not necessarily multi-fly rig or tight lining. All right, so that's the first thing. Don't be lazy with your leaders and tippets. Here's another one that I am guilty of. Don't be lazy in assuming you know what's happening on the river because you had great success last week, last month, or last year. Don't be lazy in assuming you know what's going on the river because you caught fish last week, last month, or last year. I will go to a river with a fly tied on from time to time. And usually that's because I have some info that I'm tapping into. It might have been that I was there yesterday. It might have been that I talked to somebody. It might be that was the fly that was on my rigged up rod already, and I did not want to have the line and leader loose as I walk through the woods. And so having that fly hooked to my hook keeper is going to keep everything together. But saying, oh yeah, I was here last year, maybe it's a different time of year. Maybe the conditions were different. The water was higher and it was overcast. And today it's low water and the sun is shining. But I killed it on tricos. And so I am going to fish a trico. Okay, that's good that you have those data points. But if you've ever talk to anybody who keeps a fishing journal or read an account of an angler's fishing journal, all those variables matter. Water temperature, air temperature, cloud cover, flow rates, things like that, time of day, all those things factor in. And so, a more accurate thing would be, I was here exactly this time last year and the conditions were virtually the same. So I would think that something like tricos may be coming off. And actually, I was on the Fly Shop's website and they said they were. So I am going to come fish with a trico, right? But if that's not the case, if you're, a different season, different water flow, just, any 2 or 3 different variables, And I would imagine that a lot of anglers that are much more proficient at fishing than I am would say, you're there on a different day, which means that the variables are significantly different. Don't go to the water assuming that because you used fly X last time, that fly X is going to work this time. That's lazy. It is, it might work, but spend some time reading the water. Spend some time watching the water. Don't step into the water until you look where you're stepping. There might be a fish there. Things like that are lazy, and you should know better. Um, we walk or wade through or cast over good holding lies because we know that there's a fish in a different spot. And so instead of potentially having a shot at two fish or only one fish because the fish that's in the spot that we want to fish isn't there, but there are fish in between us and that spot, and we're casting over them and lining them or maybe even wading over them and spooking them. Now we have no fish. And so it is lazy to just assume that what happened last time is going to happen again this time, as opposed to stopping, taking everything in, and synthesizing the information that's in front of you today with that historical data. Now, what that does is that actually gives you a lot more kind of mental ammunition as you begin to dissect the stream and your fly box and what might work the best. This pursuit is not an equation. It's not A plus B equals C. There's many, many more variables with all sorts of crazy, trigonometry, lingo thrown into it because we're dealing with living and breathing creatures that are in an ecosystem that is constantly in flux. So, standing in a setting where someone's saying, "Hey, how do you fly fish?" You'd say, well, you got to pay attention. You got to turn over the rocks. Got to look at the bugs. Got to look at what's going on in the sky. You got to pay attention to the flow. We know that. But then there's something in our brain that says, I know what happened last time, and it's going to work again this time. And that is not necessarily the case. So don't be lazy. Get out and actually read the water. All right. So number one today is don't be lazy. Pay attention to your leader and your tippet. Number two, don't be lazy. Read the water. Don't rely on how things went last time. Number three, and probably the last one for today, don't be lazy. Take care of your gear. So I actually had a pair of waders fail on me this year. And this is the first pair of waders I've had I've been buying waders for over 25 years now that have failed on me. Now, I've fallen down and put holes in waders. I've put hooks through my waders, but I've never had a seam that just has a problem. And I really want to call this brand out, but I'm going to be nice, right? This shouldn't happen because they're kind of oversized. I actually use them for duck hunting more than anything else. They're oversized, and so there shouldn't be additional stress on the seam. I'd be kind of cool if the leak was in a random spot because of the extra fabric and there being like a crease there, and so that wears a little bit more. But the seam was totally fine. That's not on me. So I went to town on some UV cure and some other patching materials. So we'll see what happens next season. And probably is gonna be worse by the time September Goose rolls around. But anyway, but that got me thinking. I don't have gear fail on me very much. I had a pair of wading boots from a great brand that pooped out on me similarly, and that was really surprising to me because I am not like obsessive about my gear. I just take care of it. I take care of my stuff. I take care of my firearms. I take care of my fly tying equipment. I take care of my books. I take care of my stuff, right? And I just don't have things that fail on me in the way that people often say their gear fails on them. I'll give waders as an example. Dry rot. There's no reason to have dry rotted waders unless you put them away wet, or you keep them in a bad environment, or you have them stored on the floor of your garage or something like that. Hang them up. They're going to last so much longer. And so don't be lazy. Take care of your stuff. Now, I'm not saying that if you're fishing every day, that you need to every day pull everything out of your car, hang everything up, put every fly back in the fly box, put every fly box in the cabinet, hang your vest up, hang your waders up, take your boots out, no. But generally speaking, take care of your gear. Make sure that nothing is being stored wet if it doesn't have to be stored wet. Wading boots will break down and degrade if they are stored wet, and they stay wet. In the summertime, I keep them out and I keep them in the sun just enough to get them to dry out. And then I put them in the garage and let them dry out that way. The waders I throw over like a trash can, or I hook them over a tree in the yard in the shade so that they dry out, and then I hang them up inside. I take my flies, and if a fly box got submerged because I waded too deep, then driving home, I just leave that fly box open, or when I get home, I leave that fly box open and make sure that there's no excess moisture in there. I take the flies that are in my, like my fleece fly patch, or I use the fly trap fly holder, or, if they're on one of the little magnetic dealies that I have, and I make sure that they're put away so that they're not exposed to things and they don't get rusty. Just taking a minute and looking at all your stuff, making sure that it's dry matters so much. Popping open the reel, making sure there's no moisture in there, making sure there's no grit in there, just looking at it real quick and even just blowing on it. A lot of times if I'm fishing and when I land a fish, my reel goes underwater. By the time I get back to the car, things are dried out, but every once in a while, I will put my take my reel and just pop the spool out of the frame, lay it down. If there's like true moisture, shake it, give it a good blow, and then let it sit in my trunk or wherever as I'm driving home. Usually by then things are dried out, as opposed to just throwing it in its pouch, thinking, "Oh, I'm taking care of it because I'm throwing its pouch." Well, if there's water in there, if there's crud in there, then that's not going to be good for it. So just taking a few minutes. Same thing with your rod. Is there fish slime, or is there dried plant matter on the cork? It's not going to cause the cork to just completely decompose and fall apart within hours, but that kind of treatment. Well, if that's what you're going for, if you want your cork or your fly rod to look like Grandpa's, then by all means do it. But if you want it to stay in good shape, then just give it a quick, wipe down. Just dip it in the river, rub it with your hand real quick, and then it'll dry on its own, as opposed to leaving the sludge and the pond scum on it and throwing it back in its case. Same thing with the rod. I honestly, I get how rod tips get broken, but like for that time I'm pulling that rod out of my tailgate, I'm paying so much attention to what's happening to that rod tip. I get it. Accidents happen, people slam doors, things like that, go down. But generally speaking, just make sure that you take it and you put it somewhere safe. If you need to utilize some sort of tool, there's magnetic clips and different things like that where it can like be held up against the car as opposed to just, leaning so it doesn't fall over. And then when you're walking around your car, you step on it because you didn't know it fell over. Then do that. Just pay attention to it. That's not obsessive. I see this as being like, one of two worlds that are reasonable. One is you say, hey, this is fishing, it's gear, it's outdoor gear. So every time stuff's going to happen, I'm just enjoying myself. Okay, then you got to be cool with the fact that you have to send that thing back, wait a couple of weeks, spend $60 to get a new tip. Okay, that's all fine and good. Or you can just say, I'm going to walk this fly rod over to this tree and lean up against this tree, or I'm going to put it up against my my side view mirror, and that way it's not going to fall over, and I'm not going to go and open my passenger side door if that's where this thing's sitting while I get my waders and boots on. But also, you should be fly rod should be the last thing out, right? Last thing out, first thing away, and then you're not going to have problems. So I've broken fly rods doing dumb stuff, but I've never broken a fly rod from having it get shut in a car door. It's because it's just when I was 15 or 16 or whatever, when I started driving with a fly rod, I just really started paying attention to it. So again, I would say laziness is the culprit for some of these major gear malfunctions, especially ones that happen in a very, very passive manner. So just take a little bit of energy. You can't complain about how expensive waders are and then treat them like crap and expect them to survive. So that's my encouragement. So those are the first three things. Like I said, I'm sure I'll have another edition of how not to be a lazy angler in the near future. But the first one today was, of course, don't be lazy with your leader and tippet. Number two, don't be lazy with reading the water, especially when you're just getting started in a particular stream for the day. Number three, don't be lazy or sleazy taking care of your gear, and it will you'll be better for it. So let me know. Is there something you would like to add to the hopper here? I would love to hear, because you guys have some really good ideas. And, we're 377 episodes in, and I honestly couldn't talk about 377 different fly fishing topics unless I was given some inspiration by you, the listener. So thank you again. This week on castingacross.com, the first article is called Art Show at the Fly Fishing Show. So I've done this last few years, I think. I'll get to write about fly rods. I'll write about other gear and other stuff like that I saw at the fly fishing show. And unless I find my way down to Lancaster, Pennsylvania in March, probably not going to be another big fly fishing show. Maybe some local fly fishing events this winter. But it's the one in Marlborough, Mass. and Edison, New Jersey. I'll talk about that in some way, shape, or form in the coming weeks. But what I've done the last few years is, instead of writing about the gear, write about art. So I featured 6 vendors. I think that's all there were that were primarily or exclusively focused on artwork. And so I have some pictures that I've taken and links to their websites for all 6 of those art vendors from the Edison, New Jersey fly fishing show. So definitely check that out. A lot of good stuff. I mean, if I had $1 million, I would have bought all of it. Wednesday's article was a video, award-winning fly fishing writing. So I talk about John Volker's Trout Madness, which you probably have read. If you haven't, go read it. Put it on your list. It needs to be in the top tier of your to-read list if you have not read this yet. Great book. Trout Magic is another one that's good, but I talked about Trout Madness in this one. But then, because again, a lot of people have read Trout Madness, I moved into the fact that there is an award in John Volker's honor. His pseudonym was Robert Traver, and this is called the Robert Traver Fly Fishing Writing Award, I think. A little wordy, but that's all fine and good. And it's given out by his foundation, along with, since 2018, the American Museum of Fly Fishing. And so you can read the winning story/essays, as well as some of the runners-up, if you go to the American Museum of Fly Fishing's website. So I'll actually talk about that here again in a second. But yeah, so Trout Madness, if you haven't read it, read it. You'll definitely enjoy it. This week's recommendation on the podcast is go to the American Museum of Fly Fishing's website. If you don't live super close to Manchester, Vermont, and most of the country does not, I live in southern New Hampshire, and for me it's still like 2.5-ish 3 hours to get there, and I love it. I get to Manchester, at least once a year, usually more than that, and had a great time the last time I was there and went to the American Museum of Fly Fishing. But their website is pretty feature rich, and one of those features, as I mentioned before, is the winning essays and some other writing of the Robert Traver Fly Fishing Award. And so spend some time clicking around on that. There's lots of cool features. You have access to their journal articles and things like that. Just a lot of fun, and something to click around on your cell phone. I want to sound like a little old. Your smartphone. How about that? Click around your smartphone as you're in bed. A little bit more edifying in a lot of ways than what you're going to find on social media. So I'll put a link to the American Museum of Fly Fishing's website. I believe it's amff.org. On the show notes from this podcast page over at castingacross.com. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing podcast. Please subscribe to your favorite podcast app and rate the podcast in Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.